And up next, we have a really, really interesting one. And I'm going to introduce you first to a gentleman that I work with and a friend of mine, Mr. Ohad Tzur, who is the Vice President of Business Organization here at Ezoic. He actually used to work in this building often as a former Googler, and he actually helped launch the Google Certified Publishing Partner Program here in this room many moons ago. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ohad Tzur.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks. Can you hear me? Perfect. So I'm excited to be here again on the stage. I think maybe that's the first or the fifth time meeting with a lot of you publishers. And one of the things that I'm always excited about when it comes to Pubtelligence is meeting a variety of different individuals, experiences, and stories. The next speaker for me, represents what I call self-starter. He founded a site called ScreenRant.com at 2003 and sold it in 2015. Probably is one of the most known movie review and movie news sites. And he's also developed himself a strong name in the gaming industry with being an owner of GameRant. So anything if you want to talk with him about cars, games, and movies, please join me in welcoming Vic Holterman. Thanks, sir. All right, so I think, Vic, for a lot of this audience, it's very interesting for them to hear the stories of how this all started. So if you can kind of walk us through a little bit of your sort of background, what experiences do you have before you start to be an expert in the digital field, that would be great.
I'll try and give the TLDR version, although it's hard because it's been so varied. But okay, I was in the Navy. Well, actually, I was going to go to college. Dropped out twice, was a fry cook at Bennigan's. Then I figured, well, I got to do something more with my life than that. So I joined the Navy. I don't know why, but it got me out of New Jersey, so I'm happy about that. I ended up in San Diego. And when I got out of the Navy, I had zero skills, zero money. I didn't know what I was going to do to buy my next meal or pay rent. So I got a job waiting tables at Pizza Hut. Then I enrolled in a school to be a draftsman for a year. And within a couple of years, I was doing pretty well. I jumped from job to job to job, and I was making like 80 grand within 2 years. And this was like way back in the 90s, so that was pretty good. And then I found that I liked IT more than the actual mechanical design work. So I became a Unix system administrator. I kind of like BS'd my way into that. It's like, oh, you know how to do, oh, yeah. It's like I knew how to do some basic functions in Unix, and I'm like, yeah, I'm a sysadmin. So I got hired by a company called Denso, which is a telecom company from Japan, and they had a cell phone outlet in Carlsbad, California. Then the telecom bubble burst, got laid off. About that time, I started getting into affiliate marketing. I was doing kettlebells and that sort of fitness equipment, stuff like that. And back then, it was super easy to rank in Google. Keyword stuff, white text on a white background, and man, you were #1. It was awesome. At the same time, there was this new thing that came out called weblogs. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I've always loved movies. I used to read Starlog magazine as a kid. So I just registered. And I used to like really get annoyed with some of the stuff Hollywood did as far as casting and things like that. So I called the site Screen Rant. And I just set up a content management system and started playing with the HTML, writing some articles. And next thing I knew, the site started getting traffic. And then I added a comment module, and people started commenting. I'm like, wow, people are actually reading what I have to write. So, between that and affiliate marketing, that was just a hobby. I never intended it to be anything. But then more competition came along, and it got harder to make money with affiliate marketing. So I actually went back to a day job. I was going to be a junior PHP programmer. And then the company I worked for, Top 10 Reviews, found out that I did my own SEO for Screen Rant, and they knew of Screen Rant. So they said, oh, you want to do SEO for us? And just like the Unix admin, oh, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I was kind of self-taught, and things, just escalated. And in about 3 years, Screen Rant was doing well enough to where I could quit my job at Top 10 Reviews. I actually had an inflection point where I had brought on an editor to kind of like do most of the writing and run the site. And then when things went bad for me financially, I had to make a decision. Do I fire the editor and I handle that, or do I keep the editor and I go get a job, and then I'll work the job during the day and the site on weekends and nights. And I decided to keep the editor, and it was a good decision. But anyway, the site doubled in traffic year after year. And then in 2009, I started Game Rant just because some of my guys were gamers and they thought that would be a cool idea. And I sold the site in 2015. And now I'm just running Game Rant exclusively. And that is the story.
So just think about this. So first of all, if I'm not mistaken, Screen Rant came up to a point that it was 12 million uniques.
Yeah, it had 12 million unique visitors when I sold it.
So that was, I guess, tremendous success throughout the years. If you think about that period of when you founded it to when you sold it, what do you think are, let's say, the top two really sort of areas of this is what caused it to be success, like drivers for that?
The drivers basically is if you're a publisher, write about stuff that people care about, people are interested in, people are searching for. We've talked about this. I had one writer, he kept saying, hey man, can we cover indie movies? I was like, no. It's like no one cares about indie movies. No offense to anybody here who likes indie movies, but people aren't exactly googling, who's going to star in the next indie movie. They're like, what's going to happen in Avengers Infinity War or whatever, So we gravitated towards just covering the stuff that was really popular, people are really passionate about. I mean, good Lord, the arguments that used to pop up in the comment section on Screen Rant, people having like rabid, intense arguments because in the Superman movie, the suit was not the right shade of blue. And I'm like, holy crap, you people need to put this energy to like solving world hunger or something, not this. But that's follow what people are passionate about and write about that. And plus, we had I started the site so long ago that it accumulated some site authority. And so then, we would start ranking for stuff. And the other thing, because I ramble, is treat it like a business. I had people that are friends of mine that ran movie sites, and they were just so enamored with the fact that they were able to write about movies, and this was their life, that they ignored the SEO, they ignored monetization, and Screen Rant just continued to leapfrog site after site after site. And after a while, they were coming to me and like, dude, I don't get it. What, what's going on? I'm like, because I'm treating this like a business. You're treating it like you're just a glorified movie blogger. And so those couple of things is like treat it seriously like a business and cover the things that people are actually interested in writing about. I live an hour from Sundance. I covered it for a couple of years myself. And when I looked at the analytics and I saw the amount of traffic that was coming in, I was like, okay, well, this is pointless. So I just stopped covering it.
Hey, that's me. I read about Sundance movies. But we actually had this conversation because I think it's interesting. How do you create the right balance between what you're saying, which is write about something that people care about? I mean, it is my business. I want traffic to come in. But hold on, I mean, what about the freedom of content and the diversity of content? How do you make that balance, especially when you're working with editors and writers who want to write about that? So any tips on?
Well, no, that's a good point. You have to balance it, or else my homepage on Game Rant would be nothing but Destiny 2, Fortnite, and Pokemon Go. So we have to, you have to throw some seasoning in there. The other speaker talked about sugar. You have to break things up a little bit, or else you just become a fan site for one thing. And it is a hard balance. I mean, sometimes I look at my homepage, and I don't control the content. I just oversee the business aspect of the site, and there's like, depending on when it is, like sometimes like a new DLC will come out for Destiny, and all of a sudden that's all we write about, and the homepage is like 90% that. But I'm like, well, that's what people are looking for right now, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then that dies down a little bit, and then we get a little more variety in the content. But there's plenty to write about. It's just some things aren't as popular as others. But like with Screen Rant, my God, we had so many sci-fi and superhero movies and action movies to write about that just gave variety automatically.
Yeah. Now, when I'm thinking about this, I think you've made a lot of smart decisions when you started your business and how you grew it. What's some of your tips, or you think things that were smart in terms of managing the operations? Like, how do you set the right operations? What do you invest in, like in first phases versus something that you can sort of push to later phases of the company?
I just think the key thing is if you're not like a one-man operation, is to find good writers. Find writers who are prolific and good, and they get SEO, because it's so hard to try and make a site work and have it have a good reputation if the writing is crappy. And people have to understand SEO. And
what does that mean? So that's a big
well,
term.
they don't have to be like technically adept at it, but you know, they have to know when they add an image to a post, you have to have add an alt tag to it, make it descriptive. Think about the keywords when you're writing the title. Put them near the front of the title. Don't put them at the back of the title. Don't get fancy. I mean, I've had some writers I've had to educate because, you know, they do like a really witty title, but the keywords related to the topic of that the article's about are nowhere to be seen in the title. I'm like, dude, no, you can't do that, or else it's just not. I mean, it'll do well for some sites, you know, like when your site gets monstrous enough, it doesn't matter, you know, what you put in the title, you're going to rank for it. But with a small, medium site, you really have to pay attention to those little things, you know. Title, even putting keywords in the URL. I know that's very downplayed now, but you know, I've always done it, and I think it's all incremental, right? You know, if this adds 0.1%, that adds 1%, that adds 0.5%. Altogether, all of a sudden you're like 5-10%.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you're tying us to maybe one of the next topics of conversation. We've been working with Vic for, I guess, about a year now or so, and one of the things that we really enjoy is looking at the data together and making some decisions based on analytics. So what do you think for some of the publishers here is ways for publishers to really focus on data? What do you call working with data and making decisions based on that?
I've got a huge multi-tab spreadsheet. That's the first thing. I get my cup of coffee, I go down and I open my spreadsheet, and I look at the things I track are overall visits, overall page views, pages per visit, the revenue, the daily revenue from each revenue source. Then I look at visit CPM, page CPM. Then I also look at desktop versus mobile, and I break out that, and I look at trends. I see, you know, I mean, that to me is how I gauge the health of the site. You know, did visit CPM drop off a cliff yesterday for some reason, or did page views per visit increase a lot or drop? Then I go and look at, okay, what was the traffic coming into yesterday? And the other thing I do is once a month, I have another spreadsheet where I track the macro, right, going back to the beginning of the site, and I track, you know, visits, bounce rate, pages per visit, and then I also look at year-over-year data. I've got some charts where it looks like it looks at the past 3 months of traffic, and it compares it to the same 3 months of traffic a year ago, and then it tracks it on a graph, so you can see, you know, where you are relative to a year. You know, is my traffic up 50%? Is it down 50%? And I do that for overall traffic, for Google traffic, and a few other different parameters.
Yeah. On that topic, I guess you had experience, as you said, with Google changes, with Facebook changes. What's the general sort of consensus or tip there for the audience? Is there any thoughts on like these sources of traffic, anything publishers should be aware of, or is that's just a given and there's really nothing publishers should be doing?
Well, you know, you're at the whim of the Google and Facebook gods, right? And I mean, you can do what you can do for SEO, but you know, when they change their algorithm, it's either going to favor you or it's not. You know, I mean, people always complain about losing. You know, oh, I dropped off the face of the earth on Google. Well, for every site that drops, another one replaces it. Like, I'll be honest, this last Google algorithm was not kind to Game Rant. My Google traffic is down. But you know what? I'm to the point now where I don't freak out about it anymore. I know my site is fundamentally sound, and the content is good, and you know, they'll maybe in 3 months or whatever, they'll change the little dial 10 degrees again, and then the traffic will come back, because I've learned to stop really worrying about it. I mean, unless it like really dropped off a cliff, but what can you do? And the problem is you start depending on a traffic source too much, then you're hosed. I mean, I know the sites went out of business when Facebook changed their algorithm.
Correct.
They just shuttered, and so you try and diversify as much as you can, but God, it's just so hard, because I mean, like 60-70% of my traffic is Google, and that horrifies me. Sorry, Google, but you know, I try newsletters and push notifications, but you know, that's just little incremental amounts of traffic. So you know, you just kind of got to roll with it.
Yeah, well, we're at the Google office, so there's the SEO button is somewhere here. We just have to find where that is. One example that we want to kind of show that was interesting, we were looking together at some of the analytics, and we looked at sort of where do people spend most of the time like on the page, right? And I think one of the questions to ask about this is what can you do to actually have them sort of read through some of the content to go to the latter part? Because we've seen quite a few publishers that the vast majority of time is spent on that upper side. What can you do? Is there any tips or some things that could do when you kind of design your content or structure?
I don't know. We used to, the way I used to do that is we used to bury the lead, but that's very annoying for readers because you put the actual meat of the story too low on the page, and people they're reading through all this superfluous stuff and they lose interest and they just bounce away. So we don't bury the lead anymore, but we try and add images in line to enhance it, and we'll add video when appropriate, and we try and really do kind of like analysis, something happened today in the development of this game. And not only, oh, that's what happened, but what do we think that means for the development of the game, how it's going to turn out or whatever. So we try and add analysis and make things interesting for the reader. But beyond that, I don't really have any secret sauce.
No secret sauce for that. Okay. One question, I think we have a shorter discussion of this as well, is the usage of technology for publishers. There's always questions about what should I do in-house versus what should I actually try to outsource because it's beyond my capabilities.
Right.
You've been a self-starter and started the business to see how you grow from a one-person show to an operation. Are there areas that you suggest that publishers do? Just take that in-house, you can deal it by yourself versus what can basically be, just don't worry about that, use some of the technology providers, plugins or whatnot in the market to cover that.
Yeah, if you're a small operation, and I still consider myself a small operation, I had a friend who was a developer. He was a part-time developer. He did everything, and on the side, after his day job and spending time with his wife and kids. So that I farmed out. I know enough PHP to be dangerous. I consider it like knowing a little bit of karate, enough to get yourself in trouble. But so I do some stuff. If I can't get a hold of him or whatever. But any push notifications and other types of technology, I look for third-party tools because I don't have the resources or the people to develop that in-house. And as long as it's reasonably priced, and I think it'll add benefit and the ROI will be positive or break even, I just look for a third-party solution generally.
Cool. Okay. I mean, that's some good thoughts and tips. Before I want to turn it more for questions to the audience, a quick thumbs up or down game with you, Vic. So just give us a thumbs up or down and any kind of general thoughts. Video. Video is a big question for us. Do you see more video on your site in the next couple of years or less?
Well, for my site, I'm going to say down, even though I think video on a site is a thumbs up. I just don't have the resources to produce a lot of video on my site.
So that's the content that actually is the main downside. Why would you say that to your perspective, video is an upside for sites?
It's just so engaging. I mean, there are people that won't read a 500-word article, but they'll watch a 1.5-minute video that has the same amount of information.
Yeah, that's true. The problem that I think we've encountered a lot of times is really that creating of content and making sure, I mean, if you're going to monetize that, does that actually make you sense in terms of the profitability? Because sometimes that's very difficult in terms of fill, demand, and so forth. It can help sometimes with user experience. Once again, our perspective of that is always measure, right? What's the impact for users on the site itself? Should publishers in your space be paying attention to Twitch? Obviously, a big driver of content and thought leadership in gaming.
I think they should. I mean, we're not on Twitch. We made a half-hearted attempt a while back, and we couldn't get any traction. Video is just not my thing. But there's so much going on Twitch with gaming and gamers that have these huge followings that we pay attention to Twitch. We follow gamers. There's controversies that pop up, and we cover that on our site. And people are interested in that stuff.
All right, and then you tried AMP.
Yeah.
Give us your experience.
I don't like it.
Shh, we're Google here.
I had AMP on the site for a long time, and last quarter I took it off the site, and it was a very painful experience to remove it because I had to do thousands of redirects from the /AMP pages back to the root pages. But my issue, I have a couple of issues with AMP. I mean, I get it, faster web, I understand that, but I don't like the feeling that it's like you're kind of being strong-armed into using it because it'll give you more visibility in Google. I will say this, when I removed AMP from my site, my mobile traffic did not drop. In fact, it could be coincidental, but my traffic increased. But the thing I don't like, there are two things I don't like about AMP. The monetization, it's just way less revenue per visit. And the engagement, my pages per visit on AMP were like 1.01 pages per visit. I mean, it was like people would visit an AMP page, they would not visit another page on my site. And those are the couple of things I like about it. So, you know, my biggest fear was losing the carousel, but it didn't seem to really hurt my site very much. Yeah. So.
And we've seen mixed results in terms of AMP. I mean, this is not a rant against AMP itself, but this is actually very common to hear from publishers that while it's adding a lot of sort of speed and content is faster, in some cases there's a trade-off in terms of functionalities or features or even earnings, right? And that sort of begs the question of what's the trade-off? Faster, is it always better? Is it also always better for all users? Or maybe we can sort of segment that and show it to users that really need those fast approaches. So
I actually did an analysis to figure out how much traffic I could afford to lose and make the same amount of money, because I knew that on my non-AMP traffic, I made X% more per visit. So I calculated out, okay, how much of a hit am I willing to take by removing AMP in case it impacts my mobile traffic negatively? And I did the analysis. I'm like, okay, I can take like a 30% drop in mobile traffic, and my revenue will still stay the same. So that's what I did, and I did fine. And my revenue did increase. My revenue per visit increased. My traffic did not drop off at the time. Again, that could be coincidental. You know, there's so many variables. You know, what was popular or trending at the time that we were ranking for, or whatever. But I was afraid of a Google mobile traffic apocalypse, and it didn't happen. So.
Yeah. Perfect. So we want to open it now for the audience for any questions that you have to Vic. Anything about like setting up the site or growing the business over time?
What about some free or inexpensive SEO tools?
I've used SEMrush. I think that's a pretty good one for if you want to figure out what's going on with keywords, the keyword visits, and where you're showing up, and they also show the trend of how you're ranking for specific keywords over time. And it's also a great tool to look at how your competitors are doing. I used it a lot for that, and just overall health. I like their graph that shows you, your Google traffic over time, and it was way less effective when I was using AMP because it didn't pick that up. So it's really good for that. And now they've actually, in the past year, they've added like little diamonds to the chart that show when there's a Google algorithm update, so you can see very easily whether that had an impact on your traffic, positive or negative. Other than that, I don't really use. I sometimes I use SEO tools more for like competitive research. I'll look at like SimilarWeb to compare my site to competing sites. I don't use Yoast on my site, but my site was like built from the ground up, no off-the-shelf WordPress template, and I just incorporated all that stuff already into my site.
How many writers do you have?
I've got about 20, 22 writers.
And are they local or outside?
They're all over the place. They're in the UK, they're Australia, they're Canada, but most of them are here in the US.
Do you manage them yourself or somebody else?
I've got an editor-in-chief that manages the writers, and we have a Skype call once a week just to like touch base and see if there's any problems, any issues, and anything like that. And it's really weird because I consider myself very much a capitalist, but it's really funny because like every week I ask my writer, okay, on my editor, it's like, okay, is there anybody we can bump up in pay? Because I'm always looking to like, increase. And he's like, no, there isn't.
Do you pay them per article or revenue share?
This is actually, I'm glad you brought that up. About a year and a half ago, I was about ready to shutter the site because our traffic was just like falling. And I told my writers that I'd had with me for years, I'm like, listen, I got to change the pay structure because I used to pay per post, and I had to change it to a per page view. And what happened at that time was half my writers left, and that was no fun. And but we've got all new writers now. A couple of them hung around, and now the irony is that those guys, if they'd hung around, they'd be making more per post than when they left. But now I pay per page view. I have a couple of different pay rates. I've got entry level is I just pay. I don't mind sharing this. I pay $1 CPM. So for all whatever page views they bring in, they get $1 CPM. And then my next tier is I give them actually 66% of the profit CPM. So their pay is going to vary throughout the year. But I just take all my revenue, I subtract my expenses, and whatever's left from their page views, I give them 2/3 of that, and I keep 1/3. And I'm always looking to move people up to that level. But my editor, he's the one with the finger on the pulse. He's like, listen, this guy, I know he seems like he's good, but if you move him up, he's just going to say, oh, now I can just write less and make the same amount of money. So, but I have moved people up. But I'm always looking to move people up and compensate them and reward them. My thing is, I want you to prove yourself. And then once you prove yourself, I will move you up. It's not like, somebody comes, hey, man, can you move me up? I'm like, well, you're writing the minimum number of articles per month, so no.
Can I just ask you to raise your hands, and then we'll try and make sure that everyone from the flanks and the back gets a chance to ask a question. We've got a question started.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
That's Oh my, I could get in trouble with this one. Biggest lessons learned from selling Screen Rant. My biggest lesson learned from selling Screen Rant, and this is, oh God, this gets out this room, it's not gonna be good, but here's the deal. Again, going back to like what I was telling you. I had a small team that were the ones that were really, they were the biggest contributors to the site. And there was no stock, there was no options, there was nothing like that. I'm just a guy running a site out of my basement. And so what happened was when I went to sell the site, I put aside almost 10% of the sale price, and I distributed among these 5 guys. And most of them hate me now because they think that I ripped them off. So I had a business mentor at the time, and he said, you know what? I told him I was going to do. He's like, you're nuts. Don't do that. He's like, listen, give each of them like 5 or 10 grand. Say, hey, thanks. Shake their hand. Thanks for all your help. You got paid along the way. But no, I set aside a very substantial portion, and I gave it to them. And they're almost every single one of them now thinks that I ripped them off. So next time, 5, 10 grand. Hey, thanks very much. Yeah. Well, I don't know if they thought I sold the site for $100 million or what, but I think maybe they thought they were all going to retire from it or something like that. So, anyway. That's the first time I've said that publicly, by the way. Sure.
What was more challenging, going from 0 to your first million uniques, or from 1 million to 10 million?
I think the bigger you get, it gets more difficult. Like now, it's a different story. I just launched a website that I'm like, oh, why did I launch a website in 2019? Because it gets like a trickle of traffic. But what I found back then was that, actually, you know what? That's a really good question. It's almost like a bell curve, I think, because then first establishing yourself and getting up there is really tough, and then you hit a certain level, it's like it gets easy. But then, okay, to hit that next level, then you really got to push and fight hard.
Okay, last question over here.
Have you ever thought about shifting some of your SEO focus to Bing and Yahoo to try to rank higher on there and generate more traffic?
Well, my opinion is SEO is SEO. So whatever you do that's good for SEO should transcend. It should go across all search engines. It should work. I think the issue is mainly that Bing provides like 10% of searches on the internet, and Google's like 85%, and Yahoo's like 5%. So you're just not going to get that much traffic from those guys, no matter how much you try and focus on them.
Cool. And Vic is also leading one of our breakout sessions tomorrow morning. So if you haven't signed up yet, just go ahead and do it. Thank you so much for the time, Vic.
Thanks, man.
That's been a very insightful experience.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.